This study is entitled, Who is a Jew? Christians have been dealing with that question for quite some time. In fact, the state of Israel had to deal with the question also. You know, Israel became a state in May of 1948, but July 5th, 1950, they passed a bill called the Law of Return, or in Hebrew, Chok HaShavut. Chok HaShavut, the Law of Return. It was Bill 5710-1950 for 1950. They were dealing with this question, and they had a valid reason for dealing with the question. In the Law of Return, the state of Israel put into practice the Zionist creed or credo, which was called for by the establishment of Israel as a Jewish state. The law, and I'm not that familiar with the law, I haven't read the whole law or anything, but it dealt with people migrating or immigrating to Israel and becoming a citizen. It started off immediately, anyone that came back and said they were a Jew or could prove that they were a Jew in one way or another, and I don't think they all had to, they gained citizenship in Israel. However, in Israel, there started to be some questions about, well, who is a Jew? And they started interpreting the law slightly different. I mean, there were some questions. Are you truly a Jew if your mom and dad were both Jewish? Are you a Jew if only your mom or only your dad was a Jew? Then the questions got more fine-tuned. Well, what if someone from Africa or someone from China was proselytized and they became a Jew? They converted to Judaism. Then would they be considered Jew, and could they return to Israel and get citizenship immediately? There were all sorts of things. The Hasidic Jews there in Israel had a hard time accepting the Reformed or conservative Judaism, and yet the law, the way it was written, seemed to basically include anybody and everybody, unless they were wanted in some other country, then they were excluded. But the body of Jewish laws, the halakha, composed of 613, the Jews consider 613 laws in the Old Testament called mitzvot, which is made up of oral and the written Torah, code of Jewish law. They had in 1970, that was 20 years later, they had an amendment, but the amendment was brought about by the debate in Israel about what constitutes a Jew, who is a Jew, and the law that was passed, Chok HaShavut, on July 5th, 1950, didn't deal with that. So the amendment was brought about and passed to deal with who is a Jew, or in their minds, who is a true Jew. Christians have to face this also. Who is a true Jew? And I kind of want to make an apology here right at the very beginning. There is so much about this subject on radio, on television. I'm talking about Christian radio, Christian television, Christian CDs and DVDs and YouTube and GodTube and Vimeo and books and conferences. And it seems like, at least what is in the public eye, the Christian, in at least public eye as far as Christianity is concerned, here in the West, it seems like it's way one-sided. And I'm apologizing because this could be somewhat of a lengthy study, but I would like to encourage you to stick in here with me on this study. And it's going to be somewhat lengthy. because there's so much to overcome from the opposition on this particular doctrine. There's so much said on the other side. I want you to see how totally erroneous it is. I don't care who you've heard it from, how many times you've heard it. We're going to go to the scriptures, and we're not going to go to 1, we're not going to go to 5, we're not going to go to 10. We're going to go to a lot of scriptures so that this can get settled in your mind. And trust me on this, even when we're through with this study, we won't have gone through all of the scriptures. And maybe sometime in the future, I'll continue on with the study, and we'll use a whole bunch of other scriptures that we will not be touching on during this time. Most of you, or a lot of you, will know John Hagee, although in some ways the names that I'm going to be using here aren't the most important, because frankly, I'm old enough to have seen enough guys come and go, and they'll have certain doctrines, and then they die and someone else picks them up. So I'm going to be using some names, though, that are rather current as of the time of recording this study. And I'm using the name John Hagee because he had an interview that was printed in Charisma News and on charismanews.com, September the 24th, 2014. And it was a question and answer that Yisrael Hayom, which, or in English we just call it IH. In fact, I think that's what their website is, IH.com. Israel Today, Israel Hayom. And they interviewed John Hagee, and they asked this question to John, Brother John. And by the way, I like to make this clear every time that I use someone's name. John Hagee's a man of God. John Hagee is born again. John Hagee, when he steps out into eternity, I have no doubt he'll go to heaven. John Hagee's been used, it seems to me, far more than I ever have or ever will. But John Hagee has gone way overboard on this subject of who is a true Jew. And I want you to hear what he has to say. And we'll be talking about 1 or 2 others. And then we're going to see what God has to say. And I hope that doesn't sound too overboard itself or too prideful. But this is a serious matter, and it's leading a lot of people astray. And to know the truth is important. God's word is truth. I want you to know the truth. I want to know the truth. And somehow, some way, people have gotten steered onto the wrong track on this subject of who is a Jew or who is a true Jew. IH, or Israel Hayom, Yisrael Hayom, asked the question, part of the Christian world reads the word Israel in the Old Testament as referring to the church. And Hagee responds this way, I know, but saying it doesn't make it true. You're talking about replacement theology, and I'm going to stop there. I don't know whether to say grieves me or bothers me by so many people that keep saying certain phrases over and over and over again. They build a straw man, and then they tear the straw man down. And I'm going to correct a few things here as we go along. What I'm teaching here is not replacement theology, but that's what John Hagee would say about me. If he were to listen to this study, he'd need to dismiss him. That's replacement theology. What I'm teaching is not replacement theology. And that's just one of those red flag words to steer people a whole different direction. Let me go back and start quoting John Hagee again. You're talking about replacement theology, which maintains that God abandoned the Jews and replaced them with the church following their rejection of Jesus. See, that's just totally wrong. That's not what I believe, and people who believe like I do don't believe that. Since the Jews have only been Israel according to the flesh, namely the biological descendants of the biblical people of Israel, while the church is Israel according to the Spirit, the heir of all the prophetic promises given to the people of Israel in the Bible. And then he's got in parentheses DE. I'm not sure what that means. This is false doctrine. And that's amazing for John Hagee to call what I believe false doctrine, or maybe what he's outlining there is false doctrine too, when he says that God abandoned the Jews and replaced them with the church. Yeah, I don't believe that either. But I guarantee you this, that precious man would call what I believe false doctrine. Well, what he believes. It's false doctrine. Excuse me for this. Well, IH asked this. Was it not also Paul's view? And John Hagee says, absolutely not. In Romans chapter 11, Paul opens by saying, has God cast his people away? Speaking about the Jewish people. And he responds, God forbid. And then he used the logic, I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. I agree, but John takes that out of context and doesn't even understand what he's saying. Therefore, Paul concludes, if God is using him, then he is still using the Jewish people, and they were not cast off. He repeats this idea further down in this chapter, just for those who have a hard time of getting it the first time around. Quote, and then you learn the concept that anything that is replaced in the Bible is never reappears. Sodom and Gomorrah, for instance. The people of Israel, in contrast, were dispersed from their land in the year 70 AD, but they were reborn as the state of Israel was reestablished in 1948. Why would they be reborn if God wanted to replace them? See, he's building a straw man here. And yet, well, let me go ahead. Furthermore, not only were they reborn, but they flourished. This nation has one of the most prosperous countries on the face of this earth. It is militarily strong. It has transformed the desert into a blossoming place. This is a testimonial to the fact that God is with Israel. Therefore, replacement theology is a false doctrine. It is religious anti-Semitism. Boy, the accusations his precious brother brings, and he's the one that's absolutely wrong on this stuff. It just amazes me. Well, anyway, and I continue quoting, and can only be believed by people who do not read the entirety of the biblical texts concerning Israel. I promise you, if you'll stick in here with me, you're going to see nothing but Bible. You're not going to get all of the newspaper articles and other things that are said and brought into the discussion as far as they're concerned. We're going to look at the scriptures. We're going to go over a number of scriptures, but I want to quote from just one or two other precious men, and I mean that. I think some of these men are wonderful. They're beloved, precious brothers. They're going to heaven. We'll spend eternity in heaven together. But brothers and sisters, dear listeners, what they are teaching on this subject is wrong. And that's why I'm so emphatic on this. They have television. John Hagee's listened to all over the world. John MacArthur is listened to all over the world. Dr. Charles Stanley is heard all over the world. They are spreading this, and it is not right. And if you'll stick in here with me, well, I'll ask you, you judge for yourself. What's the truth on this matter? This is some of those straight edges that we've looked for in other studies. We're putting this puzzle together from the outside in. I think it'll be very clear to you. We'll pause for just now, but we'll come back in just a moment, and we're going to talk about Dr. Charles Stanley.